In November 1918, the guns finally fell silent. After 4 years of industrial slaughter, the First World War had ended. More than 65 million soldiers fought. Over 8 million soldiers were dead. Millions more civilians died from famine, disease, and bombing. Entire regions of Europe lay in ruins, railroads destroyed, factories leveled, cities turned to rubble. The world wanted peace. But peace is harder to write than war. In 1919, the victorious nations gathered outside Paris at the Palace of Versailles to decide the future of the world. Germany was not invited to negotiate. The war had ended on the battlefield. Now the victors would decide the terms. The Big Four leaders officially dominated the peace conference in Paris. They became known as the Big Four: Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Britain, Woodrow Wilson of the United States, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. However, much of the real decision-making centered on 3 of them. For the purposes of this simulation, we will focus on the Big Three: France, Britain, and the United States. Each of these leaders came to Versailles with very different goals. The leaders now faced difficult questions. Should Germany be punished severely or reintegrated into Europe? How large should Germany's army be? Should Germany pay reparations for the destruction of the war? And what should happen to Germany's overseas colonies? France, Georges Clemenceau. Georges Clemenceau represented a nation that had suffered enormous destruction during the war. Much of the fighting had taken place on French soil, leaving cities, railroads, and farmland devastated. For Clemenceau, the greatest concern was security. France had been invaded by Germany before, and he feared it could happen again. Clemenceau explained the situation bluntly.
America is far away, protected by the ocean. England, too, is protected by the sea. France is not.
For France, the lesson of the war was clear. Germany must be punished and permanently weakened so that France would never face another invasion. Britain, David Lloyd George. David Lloyd George also believed Germany should be punished, but he did not want Germany completely destroyed. Britain depended heavily on trade, and a completely crippled German economy could destabilize Europe. Lloyd George also worried that if Germany became too weak, revolutionary movements from communist Russia might spread westward. He warned the conference,
"You may strip Germany of her colonies, reduce her armaments to a mere police force, and make her navy that of a fifth-rate power. All the same, in the end, if she feels that she has been unjustly treated in the peace of 1919, she will find means of exacting retribution."
Lloyd George wanted Germany weakened, but still stable enough to remain part of the European balance of power. United States, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had a very different vision for the peace. Wilson believed the treaty should be fair and cooperative, not based on revenge. In January 1918, he had already outlined his ideas in a speech known as the 14 Points, a plan for a more stable and just international order. Wilson told Congress,
"The world must be made safe for democracy."
His plan promoted national self-determination, open diplomacy, and the creation of a new international organization called the League of Nations to help nations resolve disputes peacefully and prevent future wars. These 3 visions, punishment, balance, and fairness, would collide at Versailles. The negotiation problem. The leaders now faced a difficult question. How do you punish a country for war without creating the conditions for another war? The Treaty of Versailles would attempt to answer that question, but the negotiations were complicated. The Allied leaders had to decide how strong Germany should remain, how much territory Germany should lose, whether Germany should be blamed for the war, and how the world could prevent another global conflict. These were not easy decisions, and now they are the same decisions you will face in the simulation. The leaders at Versailles did not negotiate one decision. They faced dozens of questions that would shape the future of Europe. Issue 1. War guilt. The first question was responsibility. Should the treaty include a clause stating that Germany was responsible for the damage caused by the war? Such a clause would allow the Allies to demand reparations to help rebuild the countries devastated by the fighting. But blaming Germany alone for the war could also create anger and resentment among Germans, who believed the responsibility for the conflict was shared by many nations. The negotiators at Versailles had to decide whether assigning blame would help create justice or create new tensions. In your negotiations, you must decide, will the treaty include a war guilt clause?
Issue 2. The German military.
Before the war, Germany had one of the strongest armies in Europe. Many leaders believed Germany's military must be reduced to prevent another war. But others warned that weakening Germany too much could create instability, rebellion, or even allow other powers to dominate Central Europe. The negotiators at Versailles faced a difficult question. How strong should Germany's military be after the war? In your negotiations, you must decide how large Germany's army should be, how many airplanes Germany should be allowed.
Issue 3. The German Navy.
Before the war, Germany had built a powerful navy that challenged Britain's dominance at sea. Naval competition between Britain and Germany had been one of the tensions leading up to World War I. During the war, German submarines, called U-boats, sank both military and civilian ships, including merchant vessels carrying supplies across the Atlantic. This strategy caused outrage, especially when civilian ships were attacked. After the war, the Allies had to decide how much naval power Germany should be allowed to keep. Some leaders believed Germany's navy should be severely restricted to prevent future threats. Others worried that removing Germany's navy entirely could upset the balance of power. In your negotiations, you must decide how many battleships Germany should be allowed, whether Germany should be allowed submarines.
Issue 4. The Rhineland.
The Rhineland lies along Germany's western border next to France. Twice in modern history, German armies had crossed this region to invade France, in 1870 and again in 1914. After the devastation of World War I, French leaders feared it could happen again. Some negotiators believed Germany should be permanently weakened in this region to protect France. Several options were debated: breaking Germany into smaller states, creating an independent Rhineland, or preventing Germany from placing military forces in the Rhineland. Each option would weaken Germany in different ways, but also risk creating new political tensions in Europe. In your negotiations, you must decide what should happen to the Rhineland.
Issue 5. Reparations.
Another major question was money. Reparations were payments meant to compensate the Allied countries for the destruction caused during the war. Entire regions of Europe had been devastated. Cities, railroads, factories, and farmland had been destroyed, especially in France and Belgium. Some leaders believed Germany should pay very large reparations as punishment and to help rebuild the damaged countries. Others warned that extremely high payments could cripple the German economy, creating poverty, instability, and resentment. The negotiators at Versailles faced a difficult question: how much should Germany be required to pay for the damage of the war? In your negotiations, you must decide the total amount Germany should pay in reparations.
Issue 6. Territory.
The war did not just destroy cities. It also raised questions about borders. Across Europe, millions of people lived in territories where different languages, cultures, and national identities overlapped. Some leaders believed the map of Europe should be redrawn based on the idea of self-determination, allowing people to live within nations that matched their language and culture. Others wanted to weaken Germany by taking territory and resources. Several regions in Central and Eastern Europe were especially controversial. Some had been controlled by Germany. Others had mixed populations of Germans, Poles, Danes, Lithuanians, and other groups. There were also Germany's overseas colonies, which raised another question: should they be returned to Germany, given independence, or placed under international control? In your negotiations, you must decide which territories Germany should lose and how those regions should be governed.
Issue 7. The League of Nations.
Many leaders believed that preventing another world war would require more than punishment. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proposed creating a new international organization where nations could meet, discuss disputes, and work together to maintain peace. This organization was called the League of Nations. Members would attempt to resolve conflicts through diplomacy and apply pressure against countries that threatened international stability. Supporters believed cooperation between nations could prevent future wars. Critics, however, worried the League might be ineffective without its own military power to enforce decisions. At the peace conference, leaders had to decide whether such an organization should be created at all. In your negotiations, you must decide, should the League of Nations be created? Issue 8. Anschluss. Another debate concerned the future relationship between Germany and Austria. Before the war, many people in both countries shared the same language, culture, and history. After the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, some Germans believed the two countries should unite into a single nation. Supporters argued that this would follow the principle of self-determination, allowing people with shared identity to live within one state. However, many Allied leaders feared that allowing this union would create a larger and potentially more powerful Germany. At the peace conference, leaders had to decide whether such a union should be allowed. In your negotiations, you must decide. Should Germany be allowed to unite with Austria? Issue 9. The Baltic States. During the war, the Russian Empire collapsed, and several new nations began to emerge in Eastern Europe. Among them were Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, regions that had long been controlled by larger empires, but now sought independence. Some leaders supported this idea under the principle of self-determination, the belief that people with shared language and culture should be able to form their own countries. Others worried that creating many small new nations in Eastern Europe could lead to instability and future conflicts. At the peace conference, leaders had to decide whether these regions should become independent states. In your negotiations, you must decide. Should Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia become independent countries? The Mandate System. The war also destroyed several major empires. One of them was the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled much of the Middle East for centuries. After the war, the Allied powers had to decide what should happen to these territories. Instead of granting immediate independence, the League of Nations created something called the Mandate System. Under this system, certain territories were placed under the temporary administration of more powerful nations. Britain and France governed former Ottoman lands such as Iraq, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. Some former German colonies in Africa and the Pacific were also placed under mandates administered by European powers. The idea was that these regions would eventually develop the institutions needed for self-government and independence. In practice, however, many people in these regions felt that the mandate system looked very similar to colonial rule under a new name. The Treaty of Versailles attempted to punish aggression and prevent another world war. It redrew borders, created new international organizations, and reshaped the political map of the world. But the decisions made in 1919 also left behind anger, instability, and unresolved tensions. The peace that ended the First World War would shape the decades that followed. Simulation instructions. Now you will take the role of the negotiators at Versailles. Your class will be divided into 3 delegations: France, Britain, the United States. Each country enters the negotiations with different goals and priorities. You will study your country's position, negotiate with the other delegations, and attempt to create a treaty that everyone can accept. But there is one important rule: every decision must be unanimous. If even one country disagrees, the decision fails. Just like the real leaders in 1919, you will need compromise, diplomacy, and strategy to reach an agreement. At the end of the negotiations, each delegation will calculate its total points based on how closely the final treaty matches its national goals. The delegation with the most points wins. And now, the negotiations begin.